I gazed out our pristine kitchen window, watching Jake meticulously trim the hedges in our backyard. Same routine. Every other Sunday. He'd spend exactly 2 hours maintaining our garden, followed by a quick shower before we headed to his parents' place for dinner. The coffee in my mug had gone cold. Again, I kept getting lost in thought lately, questioning how I ended up here. Don't get me wrong, our 3-bedroom house in the suburbs was beautiful. The kind of place I used to dream about when I was younger. Jake and I both had stable careers, a healthy savings account, and were talking about starting a family soon. Everyone kept telling me how lucky I was. The familiar sound of Jake's footsteps on the deck snapped me back to reality. He entered through the sliding door, his t-shirt damp with sweat, wearing that warm smile that had first drawn me to him 8 years ago. "Garden's looking good," he said, grabbing a water bottle from the fridge. "Mum's making pot roast tonight. Your favorite." I nodded, forcing a smile. That's the thing about Jake, he remembered everything. My favorite foods, important dates, even small details about my day that I mentioned in passing. He was thoughtful, kind, dependable. Perfect, really. Yet lately I'd been feeling this gnawing sensation in my chest, like I was slowly suffocating under the weight of all this perfection. Our life ran like a well-oiled machine, date nights every Friday, weekend brunches with friends, holiday parties with both our families. Everything planned, scheduled, predictable. I watched Jake head upstairs for his shower, right on schedule. My fingers drummed restlessly against the kitchen counter. Sometimes I caught myself wondering what it would feel like to just do something unexpected. Something that wasn't carefully thought out and planned weeks in advance. The thought both thrilled and terrified me. But I pushed those feelings down like I always did. After all, this was the life I'd chosen. The life everyone envied, so why couldn't I just be happy with it? I wasn't sure why I did it at first. One minute I was staring at Jake, all focused on those damn hedges, and the next, I was alone in the kitchen. I can't say what got me curious, maybe it was the quiet, the endless hum of predictability. My phone was right there on the counter, and after mindlessly scrolling through Instagram for a few seconds, I found myself in the App Store, fingers hovering. I typed it on a whim. It wasn't like I didn't know where this could lead. This wasn't some innocent dating app, not under the guise of meeting new people or whatever vague phrase they use. It was for married people, specifically. A no-strings kind of deal. I'd heard about it from Val, an old friend who mentioned it jokingly years ago over too many cocktails. We both laughed at the absurdity of it back then, really funny in a tragic, messy kind of way. But tonight, the laugh wasn't there. My finger hovered over the download button before I pressed it. I told myself this wasn't serious, it was curiosity, nothing more. It felt like something to fill the space, the dull, empty gap between moments, the ever-familiar routine. Once it was installed, the setup was quick. Very nondescript. A profile picture wasn't even required right away, which gave me this odd thrill, like I could dip my toes in without actually diving. I flicked through a few profiles, unnamed, faceless at first. Each swipe, a pang of something unfamiliar yet addictive began to surface. There were bios that ranged from stupidly cheesy to cryptic, like people trying too hard to sound aloof. Some just sounded desperate. I didn't message anyone. Not yet. I just watched, like a spectator, skimming through dozens upon dozens of strangers who were right there. People bored in their own suburban lives, trapped in monotonous marriages seeking something. Excitement, validation, attention, maybe all of it. It amazed me how easily they put themselves out there, this unapologetic hunger for connection, even if it was temporary or meaningless. Part of me felt a little pathetic, sitting there in my perfectly tidy kitchen, sipping on my now cold coffee. Yet, at the same time I felt a slight rush. My heart beat a little faster, knowing that I could be one of them if I wanted. Engaging, chatting with someone I didn't know. Someone who didn't expect anything from me at 9 in the morning, or didn't know all of my habits and quirks like Jake did. I stare at my phone, heart racing as I read Trey's messages. His words drip with confidence, lacking the careful consideration I've grown accustomed to with Jake. My fingers hover over the keyboard, second-guessing every response. After days of back-and-forth messages, we agree to meet at a dimly lit bar downtown, far from my usual spots. I pick out a black dress I haven't worn in years, one that's been hanging neglected in my closet. The fabric feels foreign against my skin. Walking into the bar, my wedding ring weighs heavy on my finger. I told Jake I was meeting Sarah from work for drinks. The lie came easier than expected. I spot Trey immediately. He stands out from the crowd, leaning against the bar with an easy grace that makes my breath catch. Dark jeans, white t-shirt, perfect contrast to his black skin, leather jacket, nothing special, but he wears it like he owns the room. He's younger than his photos suggested. Ella. His voice carries across the space between us. Not a question, he knows exactly who I am. The bartender slides a whiskey neat in front of me before I can order. Trey's already taken care of it. He doesn't drink what Jake drinks, doesn't sit how Jake sits, doesn't look at me how Jake looks at me. You seem nervous. Trey's observation cuts through my thoughts. He leans in closer, his presence electric. My hand trembles slightly as I lift the glass. I've never done anything like this before. I know. His smile holds a hint of amusement. That's what makes it interesting. The conversation flows easier than I expected. Trey tells stories about spontaneous road trips and late-night adventures that make my suburban life feel like a cage. He asks questions about me, not surface-level small talk, but questions that dig deeper, making me confront parts of myself I've been avoiding. 2 drinks in, and I'm laughing at his jokes, feeling lighter than I have in months. His hand brushes mine when he reaches for his glass, and I don't pull away. The touch sends sparks through my skin. You're not like the others on that app, he says, eyes fixed on mine. You're not desperate or broken. You're just bored. The truth of his words stings. I am bored. Bored of predictable dinners, of weekend routines, of knowing exactly how each day will unfold. Trey represents everything I've spent years avoiding: uncertainty, risk, passion. He leans in closer, and I catch his scent, leather and something wild. My heart pounds against my ribcage. I want to get out of here. His question hangs in the air between us. I know I should say no. I should go home to Jake, to our neat house with its trimmed hedges and organized drawers. Instead, I find myself nodding, following Trey out into the warm night air, chasing the thrill of the unknown. I made up excuses to meet Trey more frequently: yoga classes, work events, drinks with girlfriends. The lies rolled off my tongue with surprising ease. My heart raced every time I pulled into our meeting spots, scanning the parking lot to make sure no one I knew would see me. Today we met at a small hotel just outside the city. Trey had already checked in, texting me the room number. Walking through that lobby felt like an out-of-body experience. I was still wearing my work clothes, my wedding ring heavy on my finger. I slipped it off and tucked it into my purse before knocking on his door. Trey greeted me with that magnetic smile that made my knees weak. He pulled me inside, pressing me against the wall, his lips finding mine before I could even set down my bag. Everything with him felt electric, charged with an intensity I'd forgotten could exist. His touch sent shivers down my spine in a way Jake's hadn't in years. Between our passionate encounters, we'd talk for hours. Trey told me stories about his life that made me laugh until my sides hurt. He listened when I opened up about my frustrations, my dreams, the parts of myself I'd buried under years of being the good girl. There was no judgment in his eyes, only understanding and desire. The secrecy of it all added an intoxicating edge. Every text message needed to be deleted, every meeting carefully planned. I created a separate email account, bought a burner phone, learned to clear my browser history. The sneaking around was exhausting but thrilling. Each time I successfully covered my tracks, I felt a rush of adrenaline. I told myself this wasn't about love. It was about feeling alive again, about rediscovering parts of myself I thought were lost. Trey was an escape, an adventure, something just for me. I convinced myself I could compartmentalize this part of my life, keep it separate from my marriage, my family, my responsibilities. This was just temporary, a phase I was going through. I could stop any time I wanted. But as weeks turned into months, the lines started blurring. I caught myself daydreaming about Trey during family dinners, comparing his spontaneity to Jake's predictability. When Jake touched me, I thought of Trey's hands. When Jake talked about our future, I wondered what life would be like with someone else. Still, I pushed these thoughts away. This affair was just about the thrill, the excitement of being desired, of being bad for once in my life. It wasn't about leaving Jake or building a future with Trey. It was about living in the moment, something I'd never allowed myself to do before. The lies come easier now. Working late tonight, honorable, I kissed Jake goodbye, already planning my route to the hotel. The familiar weight of guilt settles in my stomach, but I push it down, focusing instead on the flutter of anticipation. My phone buzzes with Trey's messages throughout the day. Each notification sends a jolt through me, making mundane tasks feel electric. I've gotten better at hiding my reactions, mastering the art of keeping my face neutral when Jake's around. I create detailed cover stories, weaving them into casual conversations days in advance. Book club meetings, dinner with old college friends, late meetings with clients. I track my lies in a hidden note on my phone, terrified of mixing up the details. The person I've become barely resembles the straightforward, honest woman Jake married. Even my wardrobe has shifted. New lingerie hidden beneath conservative work clothes. Secret makeup stashes in my car. 2 different perfumes, one for Jake, one for Trey. My life has become a series of carefully managed performances. Sometimes I catch glimpses of my old self in Jake's trusting eyes. When he asks about my day, I respond with well-rehearsed stories, watching him nod along, completely unaware. The guilt gnaws at me, but the thrill of my secret life drowns it out. I tell myself I'm still a good wife. I still cook dinner, still listen to Jake's work stories, still play my part in our comfortable routine. But the truth is, I'm changing. The rush of deception has become addictive. Each successful lie, each secret meeting, feeds something dark inside me that I never knew existed. I'm not just lying to Jake anymore, I'm lying to myself about who I've become. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I barely recognize my reflection. But then Trey's next message arrives, and I push those thoughts aside. The excitement of our next encounter overshadows everything else, making my double life feel worth the cost. I stood out like a sore thumb in my designer blouse and tailored pants as Trey led me through the narrow streets of his neighborhood. Graffiti adorned the brick walls, and music thumped from various directions. The familiar comfort of my suburban streets felt worlds away. Trey's hand rested on my lower back as we approached a group gathered around the steps of an old brownstone. The smell of cigarette smoke and beer hung in the air. My heart raced. These people were nothing like my usual social circle of other marketing professionals and Jake's accountant friends. "This is Ella," Trey announced to the group. A few heads turned, sizing me up. A girl with vibrant blue hair gave me a knowing smirk. I fought the urge to smooth my perfectly styled hair or adjust my expensive watch. We settled into plastic chairs in someone's cramped backyard. The concrete was cracked, with weeds pushing through, but fairy lights, strung overhead, gave everything a dreamy glow. Someone passed me a beer in a red cup. Not my usual wine choice, but I took a long sip anyway. The conversations around me flowed differently here. No talk about mortgages or kitchen renovations. Instead, they shared stories about run-ins with cops, underground music shows, and dreams of making it big. I caught myself hanging on to every word, fascinated by their raw honesty. A guy with tattoos covering his arms taught me how to play a street dice game. My hands shook as I rolled, but the rush when I won made me laugh out loud. It felt real, unfiltered, so different from the polite chuckles at Jake's office parties. As the night wore on, I found myself relaxing. My blazer came off, my hair got messy in the humid air, and I stopped checking my phone for messages from Jake. In this pocket of the city, I wasn't Ella Parker, the reliable wife and marketing executive. I was just Ella, and the freedom of that felt intoxicating. I shifted uncomfortably on the worn leather couch, acutely aware of the stares from Trey's friends. What had started as exciting banter turned into something else entirely. Marcus, one of Trey's closest friends, kept inching closer to me on the couch, his knee now touching mine, despite my attempts to create distance. The smoke in the room grew thicker, and the music seemed to pound harder against my skull. I caught fragments of their conversation about some job they were planning, mixed with occasional glances in my direction that made my skin crawl. "Hey, white girl," Marcus called out, his voice carrying an edge I hadn't noticed before. "What's a fine thing like you doing in our neck of the woods?" I looked to Trey for support, but he was absorbed in conversation with 2 guys by the window, completely ignoring my discomfort. The designer purse on my lap suddenly felt like a beacon, screaming that I didn't belong here. "I should probably head home," I said, standing up abruptly. My heart raced as Marcus grabbed my wrist. "Come on, the night's just getting started. You've been playing in our world, might as well see how deep the rabbit hole goes." The other guys laughed, and I noticed their expressions had changed from mere curiosity to something predatory. The room felt smaller, more confining. I tried to catch Trey's eye again, but he remained distant, almost cold. "Trey?" My voice came out smaller than intended. "I really need to go." He finally turned, but his familiar charming smile was replaced with an indifferent smirk. "Relax, Ella. These are my people. Thought you wanted to experience something different." I pulled away from Marcus and headed for the door, but two of Trey's friends blocked the way. The street sounds from outside seemed impossibly far away now. My phone was in my purse, but who would I even call? How would I explain where I was? "I don't understand," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why are you acting like this?" Trey approached me slowly, his presence no longer exciting but menacing. "You wanted an escape from your perfect little life, didn't you? Well, this is reality, baby. Not some fantasy you can just walk away from when you're done playing." The realization hit me hard. I'd been so naive. These weren't just Trey's eccentric friends. This was something far more dangerous, and I'd walked right into it, wrapped up in my own selfish desires for excitement. I glanced around the room, seeing it clearly for the first time, the suspicious bulges under jackets. Rest was just a blur. Next thing I remember was when I drift in and out of consciousness, fragments of memories mixing with the sterile hospital smell. The fluorescent lights above my bed blur and sharpen with each blink. Everything hurts: my ribs when I breathe, my face when I move, my wrists where dark bruises have formed. A nurse adjusts something on the IV drip. The methodical beeping of monitors fills the silence. I catch glimpses of my reflection in the window, swollen lip, bruised cheek, a cut above my eyebrow. The physical pain is nothing compared to the crushing weight of shame and regret. Jake rushes into the room, his face pale with worry. He takes my hand so gently, as if afraid I might shatter. His eyes search mine, filled with questions I can't answer. The truth stays lodged in my throat like broken glass. "Baby, what happened?" "The police said they found you," his voice cracks. I turn away, unable to meet his gaze. The lie comes easier than I expected. I got lost driving home from Sarah's. Ended up in a bad neighborhood. "These guys," the words trail off as tears start falling. Jake's hand tightens around mine. "Why didn't you call me? I would have come to get you." The genuine concern in his voice makes everything worse. I shake my head, wincing at the movement. It happened so fast. They took my phone, my purse. Jake pulls his chair closer, protective instincts taking over. He starts talking about police reports and security measures, but his words fade into background noise. All I can think about is how I ended up here. The string of choices that led me from our safe suburban life to this hospital bed. A detective comes in to take my statement. I stick to my story about getting lost, about being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Jake stays by my side, his presence both comforting and suffocating. With each lie I tell, I feel pieces of myself crumbling away. The doctor explains my injuries: bruised ribs, mild concussion, various contusions. Jake listens intently while I float somewhere outside myself, remembering Trey's cold indifference as his friends turned on me. The fantasy I'd built around him seems ridiculous now, a childish rebellion that nearly cost me everything. When we're alone again, Jake kisses my forehead softly. "I'm just glad you're alive. We'll get through this together." His unconditional support feels like a knife twisting in my gut. I close my eyes, pretending to sleep, but the tears keep coming. I grip the scratchy hospital blanket as two detectives enter my room. One's older with graying temples, the other young with a fresh pressed uniform. They introduce themselves, but their names slip away like water. Everything's still fuzzy from the pain medication. "Miss Parker, can you walk us through what happened that night?" I force my dry throat to work. I got turned around trying to find a new restaurant. Ended up in the wrong neighborhood. The lie tastes bitter. Next thing I knew, these men. I let my voice trail off, playing up the trauma. The younger detective takes notes while his partner studies my face. "Which restaurant were you looking for?" My heart pounds. I hadn't thought that far ahead. I can't remember the name. Something Italian, I think. "And you were alone?" "Yes," the word comes out too quick, too sharp. "Your cell phone records show multiple calls to a number registered to a Trey Johnson in the weeks leading up to the incident." Ice spreads through my veins. I hadn't considered they'd check my phone. I don't know anyone by that name. "Mrs. Parker, we found your fingerprints in an apartment registered to Mr. Johnson. Care to explain that?" The monitor betrays my racing pulse. I stare at my hands, decorated with cuts and bruises. "I want to rest now. Several witnesses place you at that building frequently over the past month. Your story about getting lost doesn't add up." Tears burn my eyes, but I blink them back. I was assaulted. "Isn't that enough? Why are you interrogating me like I'm the criminal?" The older detective leans forward. "Because Mrs. Parker, someone called 911 from inside that building before the assault. A woman's voice. Your voice. You weren't lost at all, were you? I close my eyes, willing them away. Everything's unraveling. The careful lies, the perfect excuses, all crumbling under the weight of evidence I never considered. The detectives left my room, leaving me alone with my tangled web of lies. I stared at the ceiling, counting the tiles, anything to avoid thinking about what was coming. But life had other plans. Through the window of my hospital room, I saw them escorting Trey into the precinct across the street. My heart dropped. He walked with that same casual swagger, hands cuffed behind his back, looking completely unbothered, just like he had that night. Hours crawled by. A nurse changed my IV, checked my vitals. I dozed off, only to jerk awake to find Jake sitting beside my bed. The look on his face, I'll never forget it. Not anger, not even disappointment. Just emptiness. The detective just talked to me. His voice was hollow. They showed me the phone records, the hotel receipts, everything. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. What could I possibly say? Weeks, Ella. You've been lying to me for weeks. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I'd seen 1,000 times before, but now it felt like watching a stranger. The late meetings, the girls' nights out, all lies. Tears rolled down my face, not the dramatic sobs I'd practiced in case I ever got caught, just silent drops of shame. They found your wedding ring in his apartment, Jake's voice cracked, along with other things. Your perfume. A change of clothes. You had a whole life there, didn't you? I nodded, unable to look at him. The beeping of my heart monitor seemed deafening in the silence between us. I kept thinking something was wrong. That maybe you were depressed or stressed about work. I thought if I just gave you space. He stood up, walking to the window. I never thought you could do this. To us, to me. The truth spilled out in fragments, meeting Trey online, the bar, the hotels, his neighborhood. Each confession felt like ripping off a bandage, exposing the rot underneath. Jake listened without interrupting. His silence hurt more than any anger could have. When I finished, he turned to face me, and I barely recognized him. The warm, steady man I'd married looked weathered, aged by my betrayal. I don't know you, he said finally. The woman I married wouldn't have done this, wouldn't have lied, wouldn't have, he gestured at my injuries. This person you've become. I don't know her at all. He walked to the door, paused. I'll have my brother pick up some clothes for you. I just can't be here right now. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving me alone with the wreckage of my choices. My hands trembled as I pulled into my parents' driveway. I'd been avoiding this conversation, but after being discharged from the hospital, I knew I couldn't hide anymore. The familiar brick house loomed before me, no longer the safe haven of my childhood. Mom opened the door before I could knock. Her face, usually warm and welcoming, was drawn and tired. Dad stood in the living room, arms crossed, his jaw set in that way I remembered from when I'd disappointed him as a teenager. But this was so much worse. How could you? Mom's voice cracked. She'd always been the emotional one, while Dad remained stoic. Jake is devastated, he called us, told us everything. I sank into the familiar floral couch, wincing at my still healing injuries. I know I messed up. I felt trapped. Trapped? Dad's voice boomed through the room. You had everything. A loving husband, a beautiful home, a good life. What more did you want? The truth spilled out, messy and raw. I wanted something different, something exciting. I was suffocating in all this perfection. Mom's face crumpled. We raised you better than this. You were always our rock, Ella. The one we could count on. That's exactly it, I shot back. Everyone's expectations of perfect, dependable Ella. Did anyone ever ask what I wanted? And this is what you wanted. Dad gestured at my bruised face. To throw away your marriage for some thug who nearly got you killed. The words stung because they were true. I had no defense. After that confrontation, I retreated to my apartment. Jake had moved out temporarily, leaving me alone with my thoughts and regrets. The silence was deafening. No messages from friends, word had spread quickly. No calls from family, they needed time to process. Even my sister, usually my confidante, kept her distance. I spent days just sitting, staring at walls, replaying every decision that led me here. The dating app download. The first drink with Trey. The moment I slipped off my wedding ring. Each choice seemed small at the time, but they created an avalanche that buried everything I'd built. My phone stayed silent except for necessary communications about the ongoing investigation. The detective's words echoed in my head, "Mrs. Parker, we'll need your continued cooperation." The formal use of my married name felt like another accusation. At night I'd catch my reflection in the window, a stranger staring back. The bruises were fading, but something else had changed in my face. The mask of perfection had cracked, revealing the mess underneath. I thought about the woman who downloaded that dating app, searching for excitement. She seemed naive now, reckless in her desperation for something different. Mom tried reaching out after a week, leaving casseroles at my door without knocking. It was her way of showing love, even if she couldn't face me yet. Dad's disapproval came in the form of silence, no calls, no visits. Their disappointment felt heavier than any physical pain from the attack. In the emptiness of my apartment, I began writing in an old journal, trying to understand myself. The words came slowly at first, then poured out like a confession. I wrote about the suffocation of expectations, the allure of danger, the shame of betrayal. It wasn't justification, nothing could justify what I'd done, but it was a start toward understanding. It's funny how the body betrays you before the mind figures things out. All those mornings, waking up nauseous, thinking it was some kind of stress kicking my ass after everything. When every damn smell around me suddenly turned into something I couldn't stand, from the coffee I used to love, to the lavender air freshener in my parents' hallway. I thought it was just nerves, the residual tension from everything falling apart. But it lingered. It got worse. My mind, like a coward, refused to go there until I couldn't ignore it anymore. I remember standing in the bathroom of my parents' house, just staring at the test in my hand like it was some foreign object. The two pink lines stared back, unmistakable and taunting. Pregnant. Pregnant. The word felt too big to swallow, too much to even fit in the narrow space of that bathroom. The room closed in on me, the walls buzzing with the weight of it. I couldn't breathe, couldn't sit, couldn't stand. I just hovered there, somewhere in between, sinking under this tidal wave of realization. I'd been ignoring irregular periods, the weight gain, the way my clothes started pulling tighter around my stomach. Outright denial, really, just chalking it up to everything I'd been through. I think I knew. Deep down, I think part of me must have known, but I ran from it. It's just, with everything else, Jake leaving, my life obliterated, the hospital stay, the detective's questions, I wasn't capable of facing this too. Knowing would mean I had to act, that I had to make choices. Choices. God, those were thin on the ground at this point. I live in the one state where a woman can hardly sneeze without pushing her into some legal nightmare, over-controlling her body. Abortion wasn't on the table, not unless I was willing to drive for hours, cross state lines, an option that felt nebulous and unattainable, and besides, guilt weighed heavy. Could I even go through with something like that? Wasn't this just another consequence of my own fucking decisions? Would getting rid of this kid somehow fix things? Or just create a whole new emptiness? Would it even matter at this point? Part of me sank into the guilt of it all so easily. That dependable, perfect daughter strung things tight my whole life. I built my whole identity on it. Then, brick by brick, I took everything I'd ever constructed for myself and burned it down. Trey reached his filthy hands into my chest and made me destroy years of trust with Jake. He didn't do it. I let him do it. But now it was something different, something I hadn't anticipated when I went chasing that excitement. Trey didn't have to raise this baby. He wasn't here in this mess. His absence, his coldness on the last night, it still gutted me. I sat there on the bathroom floor, biting the inside of my cheek to keep from crying. My mother's voice from the next room cut through the bathroom door. Casual, distant, like she was checking a grocery list or reading the news. She was always so proper. They were giving me a place to sleep, meals, but eye contact was rare. It was as if genuine conversation had died somewhere along the way, along with any chance of them seeing me in that pedestal light ever again. What was that noise? You get sick again? Sick. Sick wasn't the word I'd use, not in the way she meant. Not sick in the stomach, but in the soul maybe. And yes, I was sick again. Except this time I could no longer hide it under half smiles and forced laughter. I straightened a little, made some hurried noise like I was fumbling with the toothpaste or fixing my hair. Anything to get her to stop asking questions. Those moments of enforced silence between me and her felt like cracks where the slippets slip in, and I wasn't ready to tell her, not yet. I couldn't bear the weight of her disappointment again, the critical lift of her eyebrow, the inevitable pause between her words, each pause wound too tight for comfort. It was always that delicate pressure with them. I was their golden child, the one who was supposed to get everything right, the one who'd have this pretty house with a clean-cut husband and steady income. They didn't sign up for the Ella that slept with strangers behind Jake's back. The Ella who got herself half killed in some flabberg apartment over on, or near the wrong side of town, and certainly not the Ella who got herself knocked up without a husband in sight. But this is who I was now. That's the reality. The delicate tap of my mother's heels retreating down the hall signaled a reprieve. I could stay in the bathroom a while longer, stay hidden as much as possible in the cold, impersonal luxury of their 5-bedroom house, with its spotless white trim and glass bowls of artificial fruit on the countertops. I don't think I ever noticed how staged everything in my parents' home felt until I'd wrecked my life. This wasn't a house people lived in. We had existed in this museum for appearances for years. Pregnant. The word turned over in my head, again and again. I touched my stomach carefully, not sure when I'd finally start showing or how fast things would progress from now on. Everything around me felt fragile, just like I did. I felt alone in the worst possible way, even though I was constantly under their roof. Weeks had passed since Jake walked out of the hospital without looking back, since Trey got scooped up by the police, thrown into the system, and left to rot. It left me with just this. I was left with pieces. Broken, jagged shards of what used to be my life. And now this, some life I hadn't planned, growing inside me. The future seemed unrecognizable. Would I even be a good mother? Forget good. Could I be an adequate one? I had barely made it through pregnancy class assignments in high school, averting my eyes during all the diagrams and the models. This was real. This was about 9 months, and then bringing something into the world that's entirely your responsibility. For years that stretched into some blinding, undefined blur. I stood up slowly, legs shaky, knees buckling for a second, as the truth of everything sank in all at once. I flushed the toilet, more out of habit than anything else, washed my hands just to avoid seeing myself in the mirror. I didn't want to look at this shell that used to have it all together. The first crack appeared months ago, and it kept going, deeper, ripping through any illusion of control I thought I had. Back in my bedroom, again, not really my bedroom, but a remnant of who I was at 16, I saw the journal lying where I left it. The pages had started filling up, angry, hurt-filled scrawls, fragments of thoughts that led nowhere. Something about writing it down felt like spitting out poison, even if the relief never stuck around long enough. The first moment I realized the pregnancy might be happening was already somewhere back a couple pages. I had written it tentatively at first, could I be? As if willing the question to dissipate in ink. But now the terse handwriting said, I am. It was different now. I was living inside of a decision that couldn't just be erased, deleted like a poorly crafted email or a lie I'd told Jake before slipping out to meet Trey. With every breath, it weighed heavier, and no journal entry would change the next steps I had to take. My parents would find out soon enough, a few weeks tops before my body would betray me, even if I tried to hide it. They were fussy about that kind of thing, about maintaining the veneer of decency for neighbors and family dinner nights. How they'd react when they knew the full reality, I could only guess. My father might stay quiet, breathing through his nose in thin, pointed exasperation. But my mother, she had a way of making disappointment feel like a slow bleed without even needing to raise her voice. I dreaded those conversations as much as I dreaded the idea of explaining this to anyone else who still read my social media or once thought of Jake and me as that picture-perfect couple. I could see it clearly, her mouth folding into a thin line when I told her. Maybe she'd blame herself, or maybe she wouldn't. Maybe she'd shake her head and even say I should have known better. Either way, it was going to be brutal. I couldn't live here forever. That wasn't sustainable. Yet, I had nowhere to go back to, so I stayed, each day inching closer to that confession that would further break the illusion of who Ella Parker used to be. My life was broken in ways that couldn't just be glued back together, fractured.
Hey everyone, if you enjoyed the story, remember to like, subscribe and comment on the video for more stories like this. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. If you have any similar stories to share, leave them in the comments and we'll make sure to bring them to life. Thanks for watching.